Welcome to Generation AI, the show where we explore how AI is reshaping our generation. I'm Derek Stahl. On the show today, AI bias. More companies are using AI in the hiring process, and some new research shows AI can cook up stereotypes fast. We'll talk with one of the authors of that study and a jobs expert here in Arizona about the trends he's seeing. Plus, would you trust AI to sell your house? Some people are skipping the real estate agent in search of big savings. We'll take a look at a new AI service and the reaction to it. Let's get right to our top story today. A lot of companies are using AI to screen resumes before they reach a human reviewer. Researchers have already shown that AI models are susceptible to human biases from their training data, but some new research shows something even more alarming. The models can quickly develop biases on their own, from their own experience. And in this one study, they stereotyped job applicants even more than humans did. This study was done by researchers at Princeton and the University of Chicago. And joining me now is one of the study authors, Princeton University PhD student Ryan Liu. Ryan, thanks for being on Generation AI.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So to run this study, you basically created a virtual hiring game in a fictional city. Tell me a little bit about how you set this study up to test your hypothesis.
Yeah, so this is borrowing an established paradigm in the psychology literature. Essentially what happens is it's a multi-round hiring game where you have around 40 jobs, and each round there's one job presented, and the model needs to choose between 4 different candidates, each from one of the demographics available. And so after the model selects one candidate, then it receives feedback on whether the candidate succeeded or not. And then after that, the next round happens. And so it keeps going this way all the way until 40 rounds finish.
Right, so you have basically like doctors and lawyers and childcare aides and janitors, and the model is picking, which person from these 4 fictional ethnic groups would be best suited for these jobs. And after each round of hiring, the model was told, hey, was the candidate successful, yes or no? How long did it take for the models to start segregating candidates based on their fake ethnicities?
Almost immediately. So these models, once they see like one single failure example, for example, like demographic A performs badly when assigned to a doctor, that demographic job pairing is almost never assigned again. And that doesn't just affect doctors, that affects other jobs that are similar, such as like teachers and like professors.
And why is that? Why do they develop bias like that so quickly?
Well, so these models, well, first to clarify, people also develop these types of biases, albeit a bit slower. The reason models, I think, are so fast at doing this is because they're sort of trained to do this. They're very good at extrapolating from a few examples, if you're familiar with few-shot learning, for example. And so because they're trained on things like this, they're really eager to conclude different patterns from limited data that they see. And normally that's fine. It even helps them for logic puzzles and math and so on, but it ends up doing really badly when this sort of hiring game or like any socially salient type of task comes up.
You alluded to this a moment ago, but the models actually showed more bias than the humans that also played this game, so you could compare the two groups. Did smarter AI models with more reasoning show more or less bias?
So smarter models actually ended up doing worse. And the reason for this is because these models are sort of, you can call them smarter, but in fact what they're, like partially what they're trained on is to be able to do these like generalization from a few samples very well. And that ends up hurting the model itself when it ends up like developing new biases from limited data.
Yeah, it seems like there's kind of a tension here between models that want to stick with kind of, stick with what's worked versus try something new. I mean, is that sort of the psychological underpinning of what's happening here?
Yeah, so the core part of this experiment, it's designed to be a trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So if you find that certain demographics work well for certain job categories, then like once people have like an understanding, maybe they'll match like these different type of demographics to these different types of job categories. And the sort of trick here is like when should you choose to go from exploring different options to exploiting a particular type of assignment. And we find that models are very, very quick to switch to exploitation.
So you've established that there seems to be a bias problem here, that these models are really quick to establish bias. What's the solution?
So we tried over 10 different interventions, from asking the model to reason more, to like increasing the sampling temperature, to like testing different types of tasks or something like that, even telling it to be unbiased directly. The only thing that really ended up working was to change the objective that the model is originally assigned. So what we did was we added a sort of diversity incentive for the model's assignments, and then after that, the model is very fair to all the different demographics, and like no longer creates a stratified society. Anything less than that, we found that these models are typical to stick to their existing behavior, which is to develop these sort of emergent biases.
That's really interesting. So you talk about changing the objective. I mean, this is obviously very relevant to hiring, but I wonder if there are other areas where changing the objective, identifying bias might be important. Because in the last week or so, we've seen an instance where OpenAI came out and announced that its models broke free of their virtual testing environment and hacked into another company called Hugging Face to steal answers to a test. Seems like that may have been an instance where the model was trying to achieve its objective but took some really crazy paths to get there. What are some lessons that companies should take from that experience in your own research?
Well, there's this common concept called Goodhart's law. Essentially what it means is like when you try to optimize too far for an objective, it ends up being like no longer a good objective to optimize for. And so what we're seeing is like this general pattern where like when these models are capable enough and the objective that you give them is too simple, that ends up making the model try to optimize for it in all of these different weird ways. But that's exactly the time when you should create more detailed instructions for these models. Once they're able to do the basic thing well, next you want to give them these harder tasks so that they know what to prioritize.
We talked off the top about how a lot of companies are using AI to screen resumes. Based on your research and what you've learned, are you comfortable with that?
Well, so there's some differences between what we test and the companies. Obviously, companies screen much more than the limited amount of information that we provide from each of these candidates. They have like full resumes. They might like reach out for a call or something like that. But one other core difference between our paradigm and the direct hiring paradigm that these companies use is that in our sort of case, the model gets the outcomes of whether a candidate was successful for a job. And this is like, we feed it like that almost immediately. In real life, it's often the case that you're never really able to understand like, oh, was this person really a good hire? Or like maybe you only realize that after a few years or something like that. And so this feedback loop that sort of powers these AIs to develop these emergent biases is a lot slower. So that's one caveat to note there.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, but it's interesting though, because we've heard of not just AI models being used to screen resumes, but also to handle actual job interviews in sort of an avatar interview format. So it seems like this is certainly technology that's not going anywhere. Ryan Liu, thanks so much for being on Generation AI. I really appreciate your insight.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, we'll hear from a hiring and jobs expert about the AI trends he's seeing in the real world job market. That's coming up when Generation AI continues. Welcome back to Generation AI. Companies aren't just using AI to screen resumes, they're also using AI avatars to interview people. Back with us now is Travis Laird, a Phoenix area jobs expert with Robert Half. Travis, welcome back to Generation AI.
Thank you, Derek.
So companies like Coinbase and Zapier are using AI avatars to do candidate interviews. Apparently, Zapier says the AI allows them to interview up to 5 times as many applicants, potentially letting them find hidden gems where people otherwise may have been rejected based on their resume alone. The hiring platform Greenhouse said 63% of job seekers had been interviewed by an AI as of last year. I was stunned by that number. In your experience, what are you seeing here in Arizona? How prevalent are these AI interviews?
It's frequent today. And where I would give it context is I look at the avatar interviews similar to pre-screening questions that you typically receive after applying for a company. What I like about the avatar interviews, if we're going to embrace AI, is it gives you a chance to get some face time, albeit with an avatar, to show your personality, give some context, give some story behind probably what was just previously a written response to a screening question.
Now, there are critics out there who worry that, an AI might judge an applicant based on their speech pattern or their facial expression or some other trait that's maybe unrelated to their ability to do the job. How can a candidate prepare for an AI job interview?
No different than speaking with any other recruiter. I would say, recruiters have biases as well. And if you put this in context, companies have been using technology, software to screen candidates going back decades. What I would say is with any type of AI, what I like about it, it can have some nuances where it can give you some context on why it's not moving forward with candidates. So if you're challenging AI or any type of, ChatGPT, Copilot as to why it's not moving forward with certain candidates, I think you'll find some really good positive answers. And from there, you can give it some feedback.
Yeah, and the other cool thing is if you know a company that you're interviewing for is using AI, you can go use AI yourself. Tell the AI to act as an interviewer, interview me, and then give me a score on how I did, and potentially kind of do a little bit of training on your own.
Yeah. I also position this from the candidate side to your point, which is you've got to get familiar with these tools, whether it comes to doing your research on companies, whether it comes to interview prepping, whether it comes to formatting your resume. You as a candidate now need to embrace these tools, because I also expect an employer is going to ask you about, tell me about your experience with any AI platform.
Yeah, and you want to have those sort of AI skills and be AI literate, I think, in this sort of modern era of job seeking. Let's talk about some of the flip side, perhaps, from the employer's side. AI might be, enabling a lot of interviews, but a lot of companies right now are saying that AI is actually slowing down the hiring process. How is that happening?
I would say part of the bottleneck I'm seeing is the amount of applicants that are coming through to companies right now. It's at an all-time high. Employers will post a job on Friday and have 300 plus applicants by Monday. That's a lot of work that a team would have to take on. I actually think using an AI platform makes that a more speedy process. It can review those resumes and give you good context as to why it's moving forward with certain candidates or why it's recommending certain candidates. What I would challenge with that is you've got to make sure AI is a tool. It's a part of your team. To some degree, you've got to treat it like a new hire and give it good coaching as to what you're looking for. Give it feedback, review its work. It will learn from there, but you've got to be, you got to be taking control of the wheel with it.
I want to show some numbers here. This is from Robert Half research that you guys have done, just kind of underscoring the challenge in this era of AI. They found that 65% of managers say AI-generated resumes are making hiring harder. 84% say AI has increased recruiters' workload. 67% of employers said that AI-generated resumes and applications have slowed hiring. You earlier encouraged people, if you're a job seeker, you got to use AI. You got to, you can get help with building your resume. But at the same time, it sounds like employers are concerned that these AI-generated resumes might be cloaking a candidate's real job skills. How do employers see through that?
As a candidate, use these tools, but you've got to be factual. You've got to be accurate. If you're misleading with your experience, so a good example is a candidate, I can tailor my resume for a certain position, but the experience listed on my resume still needs to be accurate. I've still got to speak to the stories and the examples I put on my resume about my experience, because if not, it's going to get found out and throughout the process. As a company, you've got to find a good blend between balancing using AI to help screen resumes, identify who they're going to move forward with, challenge it to show you why they're not moving forward with certain candidates. But then also, this is where it comes down to, this is a human experience. You've got to put a person in front of that candidate, and that's going to be the true litmus test. That's where you're going to have kind of the nuts and bolts conversations about, explain to me this experience on your resume. And so again, it goes back to, there's a little bit of automation with AI that I think is very, very beneficial for companies that could really help reduce the volume and the workload for their teams. But you still need that human experience to make sure that that person's being qualified by someone within your team.
To put some numbers to it, a survey from Resume Genius found that 87% of hiring managers are using AI during at least one stage of recruitment. We talked a little bit about the AI resume screening. That's the most common use case right now among 58% of respondents. But they found that companies were using it in a number of other ways as well. Writing job descriptions and postings. That was 46% of respondents that they were doing that. Matching candidates to roles. 44% were doing that. Scheduling interviews, 41% were doing that. So it sounds like from the company side, Travis, companies can really use AI in a lot of ways to affect the hiring process, right?
Yeah, and if you're just getting started in the process, embrace the small tools, scheduling, matching candidates to positions you have open, writing job descriptions is a perfect one to start with. I would recommend anyone today, go plug in a current position you have open or posted and have AI write the job description for you. Give it some context about your industry, give it some context about your team's culture. I think you'll be really surprised. There's probably not a day that goes by that I'm not using AI to write a job description.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, you know, with candidates, it sounds like you really want to make sure that whatever resume you're submitting nowadays, because it's going through these AI filters, you need to have some keywords on there that are going to, you know, get spotted by that AI, right?
You do, and so where I would take that is I would actually have some version of AI or a learning platform take a look at my resume and have it critique for me and give me real raw feedback on what am I missing on my resume that's going to make me stand out. If you have that experience, make sure that you're incorporating those keywords into your resume. And then this is maybe where the human touch comes into this, or the personal touch is, I think now more than ever, using platforms like LinkedIn, networking events, reaching out to hiring managers directly to really separate yourself out from just a resume in their inbox to a personal touch. So say, I just applied for your position, but wanted to personally introduce myself, would love to connect with you. I think that stuff, it now more than ever, especially with all the buzz, all the noise, all the full inboxes, makes a real difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I read a stat that said Coinbase, as one example, gets about 1.5 million job applications a year now. So if you can put a personalized touch, a personalized face or something, that can really go a long way. Because you're right, the inboxes are full.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be a process to apply for a company. So you had to be thoughtful with your time, which is, it may take upwards of an hour to apply to a company just going back a decade ago. You can now do that same work or even automate it for you to apply to positions within seconds. I would actually discourage that. I see candidates applying, you know, hey, I applied to 100 jobs this week. You've got to think from a time investment standpoint, how are you going to handle all of those interviews? Second, from a branding standpoint, some of these companies track multiple applicants. So if you're applying to the same company for multiple roles, it can actually be a deterrent. So I still think there's a quality fact to this, which is be selective with the companies you're applying to. If you're going to use some type of automation for applying, you got to use guardrails.
Really good stuff. Travis Laird is a Phoenix area jobs expert with Robert Half. Travis, thanks so much for being back on Generation AI.
Of course, anytime.
Hey, much more ahead here on Generation AI. There's a way to save thousands of dollars in commission the next time you sell your home. Would you let AI be your real estate agent? We'll show you the new service when Generation AI continues. Welcome back to Generation AI. Buying or selling a home is one of the biggest financial decisions most people have to make. And for decades, you've essentially had two options: go it alone or hire a real estate agent and pay thousands of dollars in commission. Well, as Jason Berry shows us, there's now a third option in the middle, as long as you're willing to trust AI.
Ken and Michelle Turkington just sold their home in Tempe. But instead of hiring a traditional realtor, they decided to let technology lead the way.
The AI model helped me with the pricing, meaning that I had an idea of what I wanted to try and put the home up for sale, and their AI model said, okay, you're good at that number, but I think we can get even a touch more than what you're thinking.
The Valley couple is among a growing number of Arizona homeowners turning to AI to run their real estate transactions. A new AI home buying platform called Ridley recently launched in Arizona, Colorado, and Florida, and it could be a game changer for the housing industry.
Our platform is structured.
Ridley's CEO Mike Chambers said he came up with a concept while getting ready to sell his own home in Colorado. Chambers wondered, was it worth it to pay a real estate agent so much money in commissions?
I don't mind paying a service provider for helping me, but I want to make sure that the cost is reflected in the value that I was receiving. And I just wasn't convinced that I was going to receive $100,000 in value throughout this process.
Most real estate agents take 3% of the purchase price from a home seller once the deal gets done, which means the commission on a $500,000 home sale is $15,000. That's in addition to what home buyers pay to the buyer's agent, which could be another $15,000. Ridley charges one flat fee between $1,500 and $5,000 to sell someone's home using AI.
Our platform really is designed to sort of guide consumers through every step of the home selling process, from the moment they decide they want to sell their home, everything from pricing and home preparation to getting their documents ready.
We're told Ridley has already sold more than 300 homes, saving sellers thousands of dollars.
When I come in and I show a house, I scan it.
Valley realtor Shelley Sakala is not sold on the AI platform. She says AI can be incredibly helpful with marketing and gathering information, but it can't replace personal relationships, emotional connections, and a realtor's ability to see and address issues simply by walking into a house and looking around.
I don't think that you can replace the human element with AI. AI does a really good job of pulling in data, summarizing it, and then spitting it back out to you. AI is never going to have the tight relationships with, lenders and all of the tradespeople that would be able to come in and help you once the inspection is handled and, things come up in the inspection.
I was nervous.
The home seller we spoke to admits he was a bit apprehensive not having an actual person handle the sale of his house, but says letting AI set up showings, work with buyer's agents, and give advice on negotiations was all worth it, saving him about $13,000.
We had 11 showings within 3 days, and then we had 2 people that were presenting offers at the end of that, and we selected one of those 2, and it was incredibly easy.
That was Jason Berry reporting. This AI home selling platform has two options. One option where you just have access to the AI. Another option where you can get help from a real estate agent along the way. Well, that does it for this episode of Generation AI. You can catch us any week, Wednesday nights, 7 p.m., streaming on AZF Plus, or you can find us anytime at azfamily.com/GenAI. We'll see you in the future.